Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome back to another Warframe lore video. Now, today I want to go through the Codex fragments, because firstly, there's an awful lot of... Shut up, Ordis, just go away. Go away.
Me too.
Stop it. Thank you. Ultimately, there's an awful lot of lore hidden in these. The images are really cool. The little blurbs at the bottom have a lot of information in, but also some stuff that we can read into. And as a result of this weekend just gone, where I spent far too many extra hours going through maps on Eris and Orokin Derelict missions just to get the last few fragments that I didn't already have, I want to go through them now. I also managed to get all of the 1,000-year fish, so at some point we'll be going through all of those. And the one thing that I won't be covering in this video is Ordis's story. Like his little recordings and things that are in the background of each of these codex things. I want to go through that separately, and as I'm getting more happy with editing stuff and when I've got a little bit more time to actually do that and compile the video properly, I'll take a look at editing all of his dialogue together so that we can listen to all of it and then go through what he says. But as a result, I don't know if this is going to be a two-parter. I might find that out towards the end. I'm going to try and do it all in one go though, because we've only got a certain amount of text under each kind of thing, and there's only so much I would hope that I would say on each thing, although I do have a propensity to talk at times. So let's jump into it. So I've swapped it just to the Cephalon Fragments for us, so we can go straight through, and we'll go through them in order, starting with Earth. So,
I have hidden the truth of my existence.
Didn't want to click that, didn't know where it was. But hey, anyway, I'm just going to talk over you all this. Shut up. Earth has been long abandoned due to its toxic atmosphere. It is now overgrown with mutated jungle structures that have devoured most of the prior signs of civilization. Infestation and roaming wildlife still inhabit its surface, but anything of value was stripped by scavengers generations ago. Now, we get to run around in the jungle and stuff, and yet it's interesting because we get to see a couple of different places on Earth, and you know, I'll get into this in other videos more so than here, where we're looking at examples and things, but a lot of the world does seem to be overrun by the mutated jungle that was caused seemingly by Sylvanas from the Titania quest, or Titania quest, however you want to pronounce it. And so it's interesting to see how that covers a lot of the planets, supposedly, but then we've got Cetus and the plains of Eidolon, and also we can see through the force field that surrounds the plains, and we can see much further out that it's plains lands, it's rivers and valleys and whatever else as well. So we do have a collection of different biomes still on Earth. It's just that an awful lot of the area is like this, and this seems to be a case of they took back Earth from the infestation that had caused a problem, but they were still, the Orokin was still overusing the resources in a lot of ways, and that was one of the reasons why Sylvanas wanted to save Earth and regenerate Earth, and why New Loka are now a thing as much as they're crazy hypocrites. So it's interesting. One of the things that I would love to see would be a Grineer city for us to fight in that is on Earth and is a main base of theirs on Earth, and they are somehow managing to keep the jungle back. And so it gives us an urban tile set with a lot of ups and downs and ins and outs that we don't get currently from the open plains and things, but also that we don't really get in terms of bits and pieces like sniper positions and things like that for the normal kind of mission, the solar system mission tile sets and things. But either way, that's fairly cut and dry. Wildlife. Most of the wildlife observed today can be traced back to creatures on Earth. In the Orokin Age, organic manipulation was used to modify Earth life forms to a purpose. War, agriculture, pets. Long after their Orokin masters perished, some of these species managed to survive through adaptation and can be found roaming in natural environments. Now, the thing that's interesting, just going to put that down there so that the buzzing stops. The one thing that's interesting to me is that they've added Kavats to this, and it's like the Hayaka over there is obviously the Grineer highly altered, highly degenerated version. Then we've got the wild Kavats that are seemingly, we see them out in the wild. They consume infestation, which is interesting to me and kind of leads me on to a couple of ideas that I've got about Korra, which I won't go into here. But then we've got the Kavats that we actually have, and it's almost as if it's suggesting that the Kavats that we have are more like the ones that the Orokin had initially. But it's that could just be, it's concept art, it doesn't really matter. But the thing that's interesting to me about this particular one is saying that organic manipulation was used to modify like just anything to a purpose. Because again, that kind of sits with a lot of what we see in regards to the caste system among the Orokin, a lot of what we have speculated about so far in regards to the creation of the Warframes and stuff like that. So there's that. Settlements. Like most living organisms, the Grineer require water to survive. Beneath Earth's towering forest canopy are rich reserves of fresh water that the Grineer have fought hard to maintain for many years. Evidence of their long-standing occupation is found among their many outposts that have been taken hold of by giant roots, moss, and other layers of vegetation over time. So it's interesting where on other planets, like I think Ceres, that's the kind of dumping ground. We see this toxic wasteland, and in every Grineer ship, on every Grineer asteroid, we see that they are just filthy. That they are just muck everywhere, broken stuff everywhere. They don't really seem to have high standards for their living environment. One of the cleanest places that the Grineer seem to have is the Kuva Fortress, and it's not that surprising considering that you've got the Queens there enforcing bits and pieces. And, arguably one of the other places is Til Rigor's lab, because again, he's there being a scientist. He needs a sterile environment for a lot of the work he's doing. And so it's interesting to see those kind of things. And then here they still need to maintain fresh water, and they've been trying hard, probably fighting against their own basic inclination to destroy stuff and leave it in ruin, to keep that fresh water as it is. Which, again, it's interesting to consider what role the Queens would maybe play in enforcing those kind of rules on those on their inferiors. Oh, for Christ's sake!
At first, it seems to be a forbidden thing.
Hidden and entrenched in mountainous peaks of Venus, the Corpus practice their industrious craft. The superstructures built here are a testament to the inventive Corpus engineers that have settled the regions where lingering Orokin technology still moderates surface temperature. Now, we know that Venus is the next kind of open world environment that we're going to get in Warframe. And also we know that it's kept cool by these weeping towers that are arguably like drawing in liquid ice from high up in the atmosphere and whatever else or water ice rather, from high up in the atmosphere to then bring it down, freeze it, and generate more sustainable and livable atmosphere. The thing that's interesting about this, though, is that it says that this technology is only in certain areas. So it's in the areas that we see, obviously, because it's all frozen and icy and it's where we are, and we can see the Orokin towers in the distance that are very tall and not like the Weeping Towers that we've seen in concept art on dev streams and things. But again, we've got this environment, and I'm sure we're going to learn an awful lot more about Venus and the Corpus and things that live there when we actually get to it. And also considering that there is a town similar to Cetus as a kind of landing point and a port for bounties and things like that, it suggests that the Corpus aren't the only people who are specifically there, that there are other factions, tribes, whatever else, clans, however you want to describe them, operating on Venus as well, that may very well be more straightforward leftovers of the populations that existed before before the collapse. So, yeah, that's going to be interesting. The dojo, newly awakened and with no permanent location to call home, Tenno warriors have aligned to construct secret temples of their own. The architecture within is distinctly Tenno in origin, but these hidden places of bonding, training, and meditation are undeniably influenced by Orokin architecture. For instance, the superstructure that we see as the dojo is very similar to certain towers that we see in the void and derelicts and things like that. So that kind of stands out. But again, it's a case of going Tenno warriors kind of just grouped together in clans to one extent or another, and they went and did this. The thing that stands out to me about this is who set this up in the first place. Was it just a tower that was then refurbished by Tenno later on, hence the superstructure being very Orokin in design? But obviously also, yeah, as the kids that we are, we were born and raised within the Orokin Empire. As the Warframes, as the Tenno of legend, the battle gods that did the Orokin's bidding and fought the sentients, we seemed to fulfill a whole slew of different purposes within the Orokin Empire. Everything from law enforcement to VIP protection, to fighting battles, to protecting communities, to all kinds of things that involved combat and stuff like that. So it's a case of, it's no wonder that there's an awful lot of Orokin inspiration here. But then there are a couple of other things where it's like, we're kids, and as much as we were unaware of that for the longest time, and I feel that there should be much more in the way of dissociation between us being the operator and them living through the Warframe for so long. It kind of stands out to me going, these kids are incredibly old, firstly, really and truly speaking, considering how long it seems to have been between the collapse and the stuff that's going on now. But also, more to the point, it's a case of going, these kids, as per the Arbiters of Hexis and what little we know of their teachings, they say we're more than just warriors, we have much more potential. And the fact that we build all kinds of things, and granted, we do it through a foundry system, but we study, yeah, we learn, we develop, we build, we do all these things, including things like the dojos and stuff. And I feel like there are so many different directions. I've been tempted for a long time to write out my thoughts as a journal for my character here, in terms of a first-person perspective of the dissociation and stuff like that, but I've never got round to it, or at least I haven't yet. If I do, I'll let you guys know, because I'm sure it'd be fun for me, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on what I say. The Corpus crew, predominantly a merchant guild, Corpus labor and security forces are composed mostly of purebred humanoid crewmen, or purpose-bred, humanoid crewmen, and animal-like robots, both equally indoctrinated into a ritualized and propagandist devotion to labor and work. Now, the things that stand out here is from the crewman synthesis imprint that we got from Samaris and scanning stuff for him. We saw that the crewman project was destroyed. The person who proposed it was deleted. Yeah, they were, or jade lighted, shall we say. And yet, now we can go, well, the Corpus Crewman project, or the Crewman project, seems to have been purposeful breeding of Orokin to create a crew that would be able to long-term sustain itself through very long-distance travel to a different system. And so it's interesting to go, you know, we've got this idea that persisted long after the fall, and as a result was a foundation for, as much as they are actually bred, they are created through sexual activity compared to gene molds and growing them from essentially vats and things. They have gone, yes, we're still going to maintain that level of trying to keep not castes necessarily, but people have functions, people have purposes, and we're going to do that. And then in terms of the kind of ritualized and propagandist devotion to labor and work, we see that through what is it, Nefanyo with his the prophet of profit religious spiel, and stuff like that. Whilst then you see pragmatists who are much more outside of that, much more aggressive thinkers like Alad V, ending up with all kinds of other problems along the way because they overstep in a lot of ways. And then you take a look at the index and the stuff around the crew, the various crews that go and take part in the index, and they've all got very interesting kind of backgrounds to them that all support this idea. But again, it's that the corpus are the ones that kind of worship the Orokin or see them as being the pinnacle that they've fallen from. And the corpus are called corpus because they're the family. Corpus meaning they're being the closest equivalent to family within the Orokin Empire. And so now they've kept up with that purpose breeding of people for functions. They don't clone anymore, but they still keep that element of it. And I like this idea because this is the interesting element of the fallout from the Orokin collapse. Right, Mercury. Galleon fleets keep watch over Grineer mining operations that penetrate Mercury's asteroid field. Cavernous rooms and twisting metal corridors mark where labourers have stripped the region for crucial resources, transforming the natural landscape to support Grineer occupancy. Now, it's interesting to me that Venus is the most hazardous planet in the solar system, and yet Mercury is apparently the planet that couldn't be terraformed, couldn't be reworked because it's too close to the sun, maybe. So there wasn't enough leeway, and so now we're seeing that all it's good for in the current period is for Grineer to just mine and mine and mine. But you considering that you've got like the inner terminus and whatever else, and this is where we kind of bump into a couple of interesting things about the Grineer fleet as a whole, and the fact that they're just here to try and gather resources, and that people have been sent here as kind of a not as kind of side assignment almost. It's interesting to see all of this stuff focused here when seemingly there wasn't all that much of importance here for the Orokin. Oh. So Grineer leadership. Grineer are all clones from a genetic pool of originals. They are able to extend their lifespan with recycled clone parts, but their genetic material has degraded over time. The haphazard repairs have made many of them look oddly deformed and susceptible to skin diseases. Through decades of service, many of the Grineer elite can cover the expense to have flawed genetic parts replaced with cybernetic augmentations. Now, the interesting thing is they come from a pool of originals. But does that mean that somewhere there is a library of these originals, including potentially the Grineer Queen's original Orokin bodies? Like, this is the thing that stands out to me here, because yes, we see that they're degenerating. We've got people like Tilrigor trying to make sure that they slow the degeneration down. The Queens are getting sick of it, and that's why they try and take our body to try and draw us out in the war within, and stuff like that. So it's interesting, and it's interesting to see that that's the kind of thing. But the thing that stands out to me is the genetic pool of originals. Are those still present, or were those from like so long ago that they no longer exist? Is there a freezer somewhere on the Kuva Fortress with the original Vor, the original Tilrigor, the original Vehek, the original Let Krill, the original Queen's Orokin bodies? Those are the questions that I want answered. I want to know what happened to those originals. Did they just die and that's the end of it, and that's one of the reasons why they're having problems now because they can't go back to source? Or is it just the fact that trying to generate so much new stuff has caused degradation over time, especially considering that potentially the originals wouldn't have kept as well as they could do? You know, there are a lot of questions about that I would like answered at some point. Archaic weapons. The old war found humanity facing a technologically superior force, and their own weapons were turned against them. Melee and ballistic weapons, inspired by primitive counterparts, became part of the Tenno arsenal to circumvent the sentient interference of more technologically involved weaponry. Now, we know that one of the things was prevalent towards the end was the use of corrupted, and the corrupted had weapons that, from what we can see, were semi-archaic. But the next thing that kind of stands out to me is, what were the weapons like? Because we had 4 eras of Orokin relics that have these things inside them, and yet we know to an extent the Orokin had much longer than just those 4 eras in charge, seemingly. And so the question that comes to my mind is, what were the weapons like? How technologically advanced and different were the weapons that the Orokin used before the sentients came back from outside the origin system to lay waste to the Orokin themselves? When was it that these weapons needed to be used? You know, I mean, we've got parts of the timeline, but it seems to be fairly early on in the old war that archaic weapons, you know, blade and gun, were adopted again for use against the foe. So I don't know. It's interesting, and I'd be interested to see, considering that you've got the Jade Light, or the punishment ring, I think they call it, in the crewman imprint being used. Was there a more easily weaponized version of that the Orokin would use in terms of warfare? You know, was that very specific? You know, I want to see more of what the Orokin were before the old war. You know, what all of these things that we hear and that we read about here and stuff like that suggest that there was this big change and this upheaval and this desperation. Well, what did that all involve, considering you're saying that going back to guns was kind of them taking on archaic weaponry? What was the weaponry like prior to that? Right, Mars. A primitive and devout civilization was carved into the dust-filled canyons of Mars. These aging and severely eroded habitations miraculously remain intact regardless of how much Grineer machinery has been fastened to it. Rusty metal and oil-soaked sand mark the territory of its new proprietors. Now, we know a few things about Mars, and we learn these from the Inaros quest, which, you know, obviously I was a fan of, considering Inaros is one of my maybe top 5 Warframes, personally. But also, we know that Mars was the seat of Ballas's power. We hear reference to that. I think, again, it's from the crewman imprint, where one of the other executors suggests that Ballas has maybe grown complacent or detached from his cozy seat on Mars. And it's like, so was Mars kind of left safe and saved by Inaros due to potentially preparations made by Ballas? Was it that that Ballas himself instilled the kind of devoutness within the civilization that existed here, and then because there was this void when Ballas went into hiding, seemingly it was then kind of impressed upon Inaros that Inaros was the savior? You know, we hear from Barakatir, who used to be part of this civilization that used to live here before the Grineer came and wiped out his village at the very least, that it was it was very different, and he's kind of strived well and far beyond what many of his kin thought. But it would be interesting, because I would imagine that whilst the Grineer have taken much of Mars and whatever else, I would like to see an open world on Mars. Firstly, again, because it's just another different environment. You know, a big desert kind of environment would be around an oasis or something where the city is, where the town is that we interact with, would be nice to see. But also, it would be interesting to see a society that isn't as... Like, the Ostrons are fairly simple people, but they are aware of technology. They use technology to one extent or another. They are potentially more aware of how certain pieces of Orokin tech work than we do. They deal with the corpus and so on and so forth. You know, so they are aware of how the sentients work in ways that we aren't. In regards to the breakdown of what we've seen so far for the Corpus town on Venus, it looks like it's going to be a straight up Corpus facility. You know, they are going to be very highly technologically capable. On Mars, it'd be interesting to see a group of kind of desert nomads who have been forced to settle because every other direction they go is just filled with Grineer trying to find more ruins and take more space and put more machinery up. And it'd be interesting to see them respond to, say, Inaros coming back and stuff like that. Sentinels. Now this is an interesting one. On the border of charted space, an enclave of small, strange, seemingly intelligent creatures was discovered by Tenno explorers. They are mechanical entities, almost organic in appearance, and with a precarious resemblance to the fearsome sentience that decimated human civilization. However, these small creatures showed no signs of aggression, and immediately began carrying out helpful tasks in a peculiar alliance with the Tenno. Now, there are two possible things of what I think the Sentinels are. They are either the proto-sentients as they were before. They are the remnants of whatever payload of sentience, proto-sentients, the little starfish things that they talked about before, were initially launched out into space to carry out their mission of setting up a solar rail in a distant system. Like they are either that, or potentially they are whatever it is that Natar brought back with her, because she would have had to come back, and potentially she wouldn't have necessarily been alone. And we build Sentinels now. They might have found them at one point and created the blueprints from them, but they don't reproduce by themselves. But they have adapted specifically for various functions, and it's interesting to think that maybe these are whatever remains of whatever possible following of sentient proxies and other kind of elements that Natar brought back with her that she had to shed as a result of then carrying herself across to combine with whatever was left of Margulis to create Lotus. I feel like the former idea that these are proto-sentients that started to adapt and were potentially kind of cast off as a result of, before the proto-sentients kind of got sent out to do their thing in far distant systems. But, we don't know. But also, we don't know what the big kind of turning point was where the sentients actually decided that the Orokin needed to be fought. So potentially these are just, give or take, Sentinels that didn't turn because they were such simple adaptations, such simple versions of the Sentinels, of the sentience as a whole. So it's interesting to think that for the longest time, because these guys were companions before we had companions, it's interesting to think that for the longest time the sentience or a form of sentient has been working with us to prepare for the sentients coming back, almost. Mars settlement. The Grineer have reclaimed the abandoned dwellings of an ancient society which sprung up around a massive Orokin terraforming device. Content to make use of the existing structures, Mars's current occupants have established a base of military operations in one of the few regions that has habitable climate moderated by Orokin technology. Now, again, this is where we land, this is where we end up fighting the Grineer and stuff like that. And again, the thing that kind of stands out to me is we know that Ballas had his seat here. Where was it? Was it in these structures? Is there somewhere else on Mars that we've not heard of, encountered yet, which also has climate, like Orokin controlled climate, and which also has a large kind of Orokin / indigenous facility that is where Ballas controlled everything, maybe where he's been hiding all this time, beneath the sands even. Phobos, Mars's moon, has always been a highly contested area. Skirmishes between the Taurus, Grineer, and Corpus factions occur in orbit and on the Martian moon's surface. And unanswered questions about this natural satellite still remain, as all research is endlessly delayed by war. Now, what unanswered questions? Is it, why was this moon the one that was used for various things? Is it that is this, as per the Orokin using the moon as their kind of seat of power over Earth, was Phobos Ballas's seat of power over Mars? You know, it wouldn't be a big stretch to see that being the case, but again, you know, I think that's something we need. Ballas to come back as more of a character, and I don't want us to fight. We can fight him and defeat him, but we can't fight him and kill him in whatever it is that comes next, simply because, firstly, I'd like to think that an Orokin who has defied death for so long has an idea of how not to let that happen. I'd like to think that he's been scheming and working behind the scenes for a long time to make sure that that doesn't turn out the case once he is revealed to the system again. But also, like, I want to have these questions answered, and the only person who can answer them, either through their actions or through what we're told by them, is Ballas. And this is why when in the last Devstream 109, which had an awful lot of reveals and things in it, I was really happy to hear that we've got 2 new Prime trailers on the way. One for Hydroid that's been delayed for a while, and also another one for Zephyr that recently came out, both of which are on the way. I want to know what Ballas is going to tell us, because so far all of those trailers that we went through a little while ago they've told us so much, and it's been straight from his mouth, and as long as we can find the context in which he's speaking, we can learn so much, and I want to analyse those 2 new trailers as soon as they're out. But anyway, the Grineer. Sprawling military ranks of the Grineer Empire are formed of rotting hordes of simpleton clones. Bent on consuming everything that remains of the solar system, they live short, violent lives, much of it an inheritance of their genetic stunting by their former Orokin masters. Now, the interesting thing here is we've got the Grineer leadership that come from this pool of originals, but then we've got these guys that come from just this relatively speaking kind of just continual reuse of the same genetics, seemingly. The thing that stands out to me, though, is that they say that their lives are short, but Darvo is considered to be young for a Corpus, and he's over 100 years old. So what is short here, like 50, 60, 70 years? Because if so, then they're living to a normal length, but by the kind of Tenno Warframe universe kind of standards, then it would be short. But like we know this stuff fairly regularly, but you know, the rotting hordes of simpleton clones seems to have only got worse with the introduction of ghouls, and unfortunately I don't have all the ghoul lore yet. I will work on getting that at some point, but we might need to use the wiki for that one, because the ghoul event only turns up so often. Corpus weapons. Weapons research and manufacturing is a large component of Corpus industry. Their designs are clean and precisely engineered, and they are the largest supplier of energy-based weapons in the solar system. These cunning profiteers prefer to avoid conflict in times of war, dealing arms indiscriminately to any side that can afford the price. Now, again, this is where the greed angle kind of plays into it, but also I feel like the corpus of any faction are going to be the ones that, if the sentients come back in full force and they start threatening everything again, the corpus are going to be the guys that are more likely to side with us wholesale, because they're not going to be sided by they're not going to be joined by the sentients. The Grineer are probably not going to want to work with us or the corpus anyway. The infestation is more a wild thing, and so but to the corpus, even if they would prefer to sell weapons to all sides and things like that, what's more profitable, being alive or being dead? And so I feel like the corpus are the kind of middle ground between enemies, because obviously they're enemies for us to fight in the game, but in terms of the structure of the universe, they are the tentative kind of, not quite allies, but they're sat in that grey space, and that's one of the reasons why I feel that if anything ever goes particularly poorly, that it'll be certain areas of corpus society and culture that we'll work with. I mean, we've already worked with Alad V before, even though he tried to kill us. We've already worked with Nefanyo, even though he tried to kill us. So we've got Darvo as a kind of permanent fixture in our relays. So we'll have to see how it goes. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the corpus in particular in the future. Right, how long have we been going? 36 minutes so far. We'll go a bit longer. Ceres is an extreme example of Grineer's utilitarian ignorance of the natural landscape. Their expanding shipyard operations pollute and shroud the planet in smog and industrial waste as they manufacture machines of war. These foundries are scattered across the solar system, giving them near limitless reach with their fleets. Now again, this seems to kind of sit counter to what was said about Earth, because here they're going, they're utilitarian ignorance of the natural landscape. Their shipyard operations pollute and shroud the planet in smog and industrial waste. And we see this when we go and visit the planet. So it's like seemingly Ceres was developed into more of a proper planetoid or whatever else by the Orokin, made it settleable, considering there's breathable atmosphere there and all that kind of thing. But the Grineer have ignored that. They just want the materials, they want the ships, they want to build out and develop more, and so as a result they've just ignored it, which again makes me feel like the fresh water that they're so concerned about on Earth is an interesting thing, because again, like, you can get water from a lot of different places. You can melt ice from the asteroid belt, for instance, and just quickly process it just to make sure that it's safe for consumption. But it's Earth they're concerned about, and the Orokin we see as being concerned about Earth as well. But we don't fully understand the full breadth of why Earth is so important to them, considering that they have the whole solar system and they still have elements of Earth. Like, there seems to be this attachment there that goes beyond it. And it could just be that Earth is the human race's origin, and so that's where the Queens have this connection. That's where Ballas had the connection, and especially if the Queens are Ballas's daughters. Big speculation there. Who knows? But it's interesting to see the kind of level of attachment to Earth specifically, but anywhere else can just get wrecked. Grineer labour. Strict laws on organic engineering impose severe mental and physical health limitations on the Grineer labour force. Whatever standard human stock they were originally derived from has been lost. Compliant and high-performing variants are often technically augmented to extend their lifespans beyond the few decades that they can normally expect in operation. So, this is an interesting one because it's the Warforce. The Warforce, they live their violent lives. Seemingly, it says here, only a few decades, but it's high performing ones can be augmented and further developed to last for longer. But also, the Queens have put in these laws, seemingly, to ensure that everyone that's below them is kept below them. They learned from the Grineer uprising against the Orokin as a result of the collapse, and they've gone, right, so we need to make them stupider, and we need to make sure that they are less healthy, so that the same uprising doesn't, history doesn't repeat. And I feel like that's the thing about the Queens. They're a good enemy because they learn from their mistakes. Now, they've only made one mistake against us so far, and that was thinking that they could beat us, like, mind to mind, in terms of just raw power. But it's gonna be interesting to see what they do next. Now, that's considering that they are an enemy that seems to learn from their mistakes, unlike certain others that we face, it's going to be interesting to see kind of where they go now and what they try and do to us next. Jupiter. It is not impossible to mine a star rich with liquid metallic resources. The gas giant Jupiter challenges harvesters with increased gravity, intense magnetic fields, and extreme temperatures. Only the most tenacious profiteers would dare operate here. Prevailing science of corpus industry thrives in the clouds of Jupiter's outer atmosphere. Now, we see Alad V setting up here. And if you rumble around these huge towers and look out across to all of the others, like, there seem to be a fair few floating up there. So when they say only the most tenacious profiteers would dare operate here, well, it seems like there are still a fair number of those. And I feel like Jupiter is probably one of the best strongholds that the Corpus have, purely because them being sat here, them functioning here, and taking all of this stuff on, like, we can attack because we come down individually in a tiny ship that is still designed, essentially Orokin design, to one extent or another, and we take the facility from the inside out. A Grineer galleon coming to try and take control of these, though, would have a lot more difficulty in the atmosphere with all of the different things, especially things like intense magnetic fields that would potentially, as much as there's an awful lot of mechanical elements to a Grineer ship, they still have that power flow that running through their vessels, and so having that interrupted, having an entire Grineer galleon that just wasn't prepared for this environment crashing down, I feel like that's one of the reasons why we see Jupiter as being such a well-controlled kind of corpus environment. Right, so we've been going 45 minutes now, guys. So what I think I'm going to do is we'll start off with robotics next time, and we'll go through. Yeah, we should be able to. How many have we done? Well, we did 3 lines, so this might take a little longer than I thought, just because of the time of going through it, reading through it, and then giving thoughts afterwards. But we'll start with robotics next time, and we will continue through after that. But otherwise, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care.